Hello, church. Well, this week we begin our new Core 52 series, where we're going through 52 weeks of the foundational issues, some of the foundational topics, and then we're going to follow that up with a sermon series followed up by a class. Every Sunday morning we're going to have a class and look at this, and you can buy a book that will follow you through and let you have some additional reading during the week. You can do a Devo with your family. It gives a little bit about the topics that are coming up, and it'll be hopefully a great inspiration and a good tool to use to help you grow in your faith. I brought with me this morning, it's going to be hard to see, but you could probably see that, make that out. You might wonder, what is that? This is important to me. To you, it's probably just a piece of plastic. And if one of you knows what this is, give me a text. Say, Jamie, I got one of those too, because there's a chance you might know what this is. Some of you think it's maybe a shoehorn or something, but no, this is a key. And this is important to me because this is a key to the hinge pin, the hinge screw on my door for the shed. Now, I built my shed 3 years ago, but you know the ground shifts, and every winter one of the doors are one more than the other. When you open the door in the middle of the winter, the door falls off. So I need this key because it's made a special fit just for this pin. And it fits in there. There's a pattern. Similar to how those of you might have a wheel lock on your car. So this will fit in there, and it helps me adjust the pin. I can adjust the height, and it fixes it temporarily until the next season. Some of you might say, Jamie, you need to learn how to build sheds better. Sure enough, I was in a hurry. The point is, though, I can get this off. I could use a screwdriver or some other instrument to take this pin off. I don't necessarily need the key, but I would do that at risk of damaging this pin. Therefore, I keep this key in my house, and I put it in a bag, and I label it, and it's a very important tool for me. Now, if you found this sitting out in the road, if I happened to drop it one day and it was on the curb or maybe in a park, and you just came across this, the majority of you would look at this and you would just toss it out. You wouldn't even pick it up. What is that? Just a piece of junk. That's all it would probably be to the majority of others. Even if you knew that this was for a shed, if you own the same shed I do, and you built your shed properly, you probably don't need to use this pin any more than the first time you put it together. And so this wouldn't mean, you don't need a spare key. So this is garbage. And to me it's important, but to pretty much everyone else, this is garbage, a piece of garbage or recycle. Now, what's sad is that there's so many people in this world today that look around at everything they see, and they look at you and I, and they say that we're here and that we're not that important. Now, they don't really say that. It's not what anyone would really say, that we're not important, but they say that life here exists just by chance. Happenstance. It's just circumstances just happen to allow it, that life on earth, that everything we see just happened. And really that means that there's no meaning. As a matter of fact, if you want to take that thought and follow it, chase that thought a little bit, if we're just here and we're just a part of the cosmos, and really what is our minds, our thinking, what does it amount to? And why are we special than anything else? As a matter of fact, we're destroying this planet probably more than any other species out there. And so, other species, that they could think and talk the way they probably see us maybe as a virus. But because we can, might makes right, maybe we think we're special. Well, it's really sad to think of the world and to think of the universe in those terms. I was reading an article, and some of you have heard of the infinite monkey theorem. If there's an infinite amount of monkeys, an infinite amount of keyboards and time, eventually a monkey would come up with Shakespeare's Hamlet. And Gerard Schroeder, he talked about this in the debates about, how you could talk about, time and how much time, whether that's even possible. And he debated this a while ago. I'm not going to get into that, but let's assume that's true. Let's assume that it's true. And over time, a monkey does come up with Shakespeare's Hamlet. Would it still be Shakespeare's Hamlet? Would the prose and poetry and the intent of the artist still be there? No. That would just be a story. It wouldn't be that special. You see, what makes a lot of art, what makes a lot of writing important and special is the thought behind it, the artist. Those who had the intent and the design, the creation. And that's what makes it special to many of us. And so, if we're just here and there's no designer and we're just a part of this cosmos, then really the only thing that makes us special is perhaps just how we feel about ourselves as a species. And we should just enjoy every moment, the feelings we get, for what it is. That's pretty sad if that's the reality that we live in. That's be a sad reality. But you know, the search for meaning and purpose is something that humanity's been looking for. We've been searching for that. And it just so happens that a God, a creator, a being greater than this cosmos, greater than what you and I can even imagine, this being is reaching out to us, telling us that He's the creator, that He's the designer of all this, and that we do have purpose, and there is meaning. And He talks to us through the cosmos, through what we see, through the universe, through the beauty of this earth. He's talking to us through creation, through people and time, and through stories. And eventually, He speaks to us as coming down to be one of us, so we could understand Him, so we could see Him differently. And He comes to be one of us. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and that is Jesus Christ. And Jesus comes, God in the flesh, to communicate with us. And eventually this is written down. God, this being that is greater than you and I can even imagine, communicates with us in all these ways, and it's been written down for us in what we commonly understand as the Bible. And the Bible opens up in Genesis chapter 1. The very first thing that the Bible opens up to is this infinite being communicating with us. In the beginning, God created. This being introduces Himself to us, and we begin to learn a little bit about God. And when we read Genesis, it's sad. We have all these other questions. But what about this? And what about this? And this doesn't make sense. And that's not what we see today. And we ask a lot of questions that really the text isn't really trying to answer. I mean, the creation of everything we see in one page or 2 pages, depending on the font of your Bibles, God created. All of this. Then we get into, is this a literal 7 days? Or, in the story of Adam and Eve, is this real? And we get into all these questions, and sometimes we get lost in these questions, and people walk away from their faith, and they miss what God is trying to tell us. So here in Genesis chapter 1, let's see what God does tell us, and what God is trying to communicate to us. First of all, that He was there before all of this. He exists outside of time and space, outside of matter as we know it. God is there. And out of the chaos, God brings order. And God brings light into darkness. And He brings life into emptiness. And when we read this story and we read these, if you don't look at it as 7 days, think of it as 7 things, 7 events God's communicating to us. And there's 7 events, but in each thing God's communicating something to us. And I want you to take a look at that, and I want you to see, what is it that God's communicating? Notice that in verse 4, He creates the light, and God saw the light and it was good. Well, if God feels it's good, what does that mean for God to think of something as good? You know that God, 7 times the word good is used here, well, good in English. In verse 10, after the land is gathered, it was good. Verse 12, vegetation, it was good. Verse 18, the stars in the universe, it was good. Verse 21 and to 23, the fish and the birds, it was good. And then the animals, it was good. Verse 25. And then finally, after all this, comes humanity, and it was very good. God was pleased. You want to learn something about God? Here is God. He's in the beginning. And God, He exists outside of time and space. He's not a part of this physical time and space environment that we are in, but He enters into it. The Spirit of God is hovering. And so, wind. Here is God. He's not physical, but yet God creates this. And He creates all this, and God feels goodness. Well, what does that mean? Well, we can kind of relate, right? God helps us to understand what goodness is and joy. And so when we read and we see God was pleased, God was very pleased, we can understand this is something that God wanted, God desired. And so God creates us, and then He rests. Even in the order of creation here, we learn something about God. God created all this. It appears that when He creates us last, it's the culmination of what He's doing, and then He rests. this was all created for us. Somebody will say, oh, that's very egotistical. But really, if that's what God's communicating, is it really far-fetched to think like that? I mean, when I go to someone's home, a young couple, if they're expecting a baby and they know what gender that baby is, they might have a room ready to go. Even if they don't know the gender, it doesn't matter, but that might, they might paint and get different clothing depending on what they're expecting for their child. But for you to go to the hospital and have a baby in the middle of winter and to bring that child home, if you're unprepared, I mean, that'd be fool. They won't let you take a child home in the middle of winter if you had no car, no blanket, no car seat. You can't just take a naked baby out of the hospital and bring it home. Who would do that? We would not do that. We prepare our home, right? You make sure you got food in your fridge because you're probably going to be too tired to go and get some groceries. You make sure that you have diapers and wipes. You make sure that you have a car seat. Some people go to extremes. They make sure the play set in the backyard's set up. And, but we prepare for bringing a child home. We do this even if you're going to buy a pet at the store. You prepare for that. And we're not pets to God, but more like children where God builds this for us, an environment. And then the story continues where God places us in this environment and gives us dominion to rule over it. And He creates us in His image. Next week, Brandon's going to talk a little bit more about that, and that is so important. And then the story continues, and this isn't a story about the cosmos. The Bible is not a story about all these other things. It's the story about humanity. We are special to God. Why? We are no mistake. God knew what He was doing. In Luke chapter 14, when Jesus is talking to us about becoming a disciple, a follower of Jesus, a follower of Him, He says, some of you, it's going to be real hard. There might be some persecutions. You might face a lot of troubles in becoming a disciple, and it shouldn't just be something you take lightly, nor should it be today. It should be something that we calculate, we understand, and our hearts are there. And Jesus says, when you're building, if you're going to build something, don't you first make sure that you have enough material and you have enough money to finish the project before you start it? And if you look at some projects, you can Google on the internet things that haven't been finished. Or maybe you think of, as Jesus talks about next, the king going to war. He said, you'll consider who you're going up against. And if you have no chance, you'll probably go and want to make peace with them. And so Jesus says, don't you first count the cost, estimate the cost to see if you have enough to complete it. If Jesus told us that, God knows that. Don't you think that God calculated the cost before He created us? It's not like, we read, and God said it's not good for man to be alone. Again, the text is trying to teach us something. The animals were created from dust. People were created from dust. Adam was created from dust. And in that alone, when Eve is created from the rib of Adam, not from the dust. I mean, God is communicating through us through this story. He communicates in the order of events. He communicates to us through all different ways as we read this text. We just need to be opening our eyes and looking for it and asking the right questions, or at least trying to look for what God is trying to teach us. God is teaching us that we are not a mistake. That He knew and He calculated before He created us, He knew what it would cost Him. And He was still willing. The Apostle Paul says in Ephesians, as he writes to those in Ephesus, that that He chose us in Him before the creation of the world. And Peter, this is the Peter who walked on the water, who was an apostle, one of the 12 with Jesus. It says that Jesus, He was chosen before the creation of the world, but revealed in these last times. See, God knew that He would have to send the Son. And as Paul writes in Colossians, that all things have been created through Him, through Jesus, and for Him. He was before all things, and in Him all things hold together. Colossians 1:16. You see, this was a part of a plan to create you and I to have a relationship with the Father. And there's more to this, but God has a purpose and a plan for us to walk with Him, to be with Him. And as we see the story goes, we see that we've messed up, but God was willing to fix that. That God found joy in creating us, and there was even joy. He was pleased to sacrifice for us. For the joy set before Him, Jesus endured the cross, the Hebrew writer would say. It's not something that He wasn't joyful of the pain or what He had to do, but what the end result was. Just as God was joyful at all those things He was created, and finally here we are, and He gives us dominion to rule over, and we are like Him in His image, not physically, but we are in His image in our creation, in love and goodness, in all those qualities that we discover about this one being over everything. And so God creates us a God of love. A God of love who creates us and asks us that the number one command, love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then number 2, love your neighbor as yourself. Love is the rule, the golden rule. Love is at the core, is at the center of who God is, and God creates us. And love is giving, love is sharing, and that's what God does, is He creates us and He gives us free choice so we can now use our choice to love Him and to enter in a relationship with Him, because God is a relational being. He doesn't need us, but love desires that, perhaps. Mark Moore in his book talks about the Trinity, relation, one God, 3 persons, Father, Son, and Spirit. Like the architect, engineer, and builder, they work together. There's a plan, and you see the Father sends the Son, and the Son sends the Spirit, and in the beginning, all things created through the Son, and the Spirit of God's hovering over the water. I mean, when you just look at the Trinity in Scriptures. Now, again, this is a God that you and I cannot understand. Don't think that science is going to help us understand God. God is revealing things to us in ways we might understand. And I think God, He designs family, He designs relationship, parents and children, husbands and wives, the 2 become one. We can kind of understand a little bit about oneness through relationships. We can understand a little bit about the love, how love works between a father or a mother and a son or a daughter. And we see how love feels and how love works. And we begin to understand the joy that we must bring to God when we have a relationship with Him and when we trust Him. And so we were created with a purpose. We were designed with intent. We are no mistake. 3,000 years ago, David understood this. As he writes, I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And in Psalm 19 we read, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They have no words. No sound is heard in them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. David probably sat out there as a shepherd and he looked up and marveled at the stars in the sky. He knew far less than we do about about everything, the design and all the things that we see and understand. Mike Toohey's going to talk to us a little bit about eyes and the things that we can, just the intricacy of life. Wow. It screams designer. It screams creator. And God is trying to communicate to us. And so it pleased God to make us and to have a relationship with Him. But sadly, there's so many people out there today that don't understand this. In 2005, it was really sad. In 2005, there was an exhibit in the London Zoo, and it was the human exhibit, where families could go and see behind a cage and behind the fence, they could see some humans there. There were several young people there that were playing some board games and just sitting there and soaking up the sun and talking and maybe doing a little bit of acting and picking bugs out of their hair or whatever they might have done. And a spokesperson for the zoo said they wanted people to see humans in a different environment among other animals because it teaches us that the human is just another primate. One of the participants said, a lot of people think that humans are above other animals. When they see humans as animals, it kind of reminds them that we're not that special. It's sad that there's a lot of people in the world that think that. There's a lot of people who are angry at what they might think they understand about God. What they might think and might have heard or read and might think that God is saying to them and communicating to them and maybe missing so many other things. And there's people out there that are searching so hard to try to disprove that this designer exists. That's a really sad state. And God, He wants us to understand that we are special. That all of this has been created for us. And that in all this creation, there is even more going on than you and I understand. The Apostle Paul, he says, do you not know that you will judge the angels? There are other beings out there that God's trying to teach us a little bit about. There's not a lot about that. There's other beings that we're interacting with. The Hebrew writer says it's not the angels that he had subjected the world to come. It's not the angels that Jesus came to die for. There are other things out there that we might not understand. And for us to try and put ourselves in God's shoes and think that we know more than God, it's going to end up in a bad place. But God wants us to trust Him. To trust Him, just as He asked with the beginning there in that story with Adam and Eve. Trust Him. And when we fail, we see we make a mess of things. Now we're still a part of that story. God is still present today, and He is right there, right here and right there with you and I. No matter what time of day, no matter where you are in the world, God is still there, and He still wants you to know that you are special, and He's calling you to trust Him. He's calling you to turn to Him, and He's calling us, when we do turn to Him, we do trust Him, to go out and to tell others. Because there's a lot of lost sheep who need to know that the God of all creation loves us, has a purpose and a plan for us, and has called us into a relationship, and He's called us His children. May we search for the answers, search for God speaking to us in the message that God is trying to communicate. And then we trust Him, even though we don't understand what's going on. But give Him our lives and trust Him and try to listen to Him as we follow the path that Jesus came to try and get us to see more clearly. And wait to see how the story unfolds as we trust our Heavenly Father.